And my special guest is Dr. Craig Malkin, the author of Rethinking Narcissism. This is our second time around. Thank you for coming in and doing this again with me,
You're
Craig.
welcome. Yeah.
The last conversation that we had really kind of sparked some thoughts with me, and I really wanted to come back and revisit the conversation kind of from the other perspective of echo in this conversation, because so much about the narcissistic state and the conversation around narcissism has really devolved in my mind into one of blame and of judgment. And I think the understanding of the complex of the narcissism or the narcissist and the different ways it shows up um, kind of dictates to us how we can interact with it. But also, from the perspective that you bring in your book of echo, which is kind of the counterpart to the narcissist, um, really speaks to that interaction and how people get blindly drawn into these relationships and don't take responsibility for their end of that. And that doesn't mean that, as I look at it, at least through the eyes of conflict and of relationship and conflicted relationship, if you will, that without the understanding of this dance between the two, there's no resolution. And I don't think, and please come into the conversation with this though with me, is that without that acknowledgement, well, what I was going to say is there is no external resolution in this dance. It's all internal. It's all about how we disengage, how we look at the dance, and really start to step into this conversation a little differently.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I always say, and I think it's important to say up front, we're talking about relationships where sometimes people become abusive, right? If you're
Mhm.
with somebody who's narcissistic, there are a subset of people with narcissistic personality disorder who can become abusive, and abuse is 100% the responsibility of the abuser. But if we get too focused on the problems in the other person in a relationship rather than what's going on in ourselves, then we can't do the healing that's required to extract ourselves from
Mhm.
those relationships, and also to be open to healthier ways of relating over time. So I often talk to people about this work that you're doing. Say if I'm working with somebody who struggles uh, in a relationship, who tends to find themselves with narcissistic friends or partners, I'll often say this work that you're doing right now, regardless of whether or not the person that you're with is healthy enough to receive your changes, is
Mhm.
going to help you throughout the rest of your life. And it will give you clarity about what you need to do in the relationship that you're in right now.
Yeah, stay, go, adjust, whatever those pieces are, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So should we talk about echo and echoism now?
Let's bring that in, and if you would, Craig, frame that around the conversation of narcissism as the stepping in point, if you would.
Yeah, the opening to my book, Rethinking Narcissism, I retell the myth of Narcissus and Echo. And at the time that I wrote that book and introduced the concepts to people, most people had not even heard of Echo, which I think is so telling, and it's such a great reflection of the problem of echoism. Because Echo was the nymph who was cursed to repeat back the last few words that she heard. She had no voice of her own, and she fell in love with the vain Greek youth Narcissus. That's the myth. And in some versions, she pines away until she disappears, and there's only an echo of her left. And I think that's a really provocative and evocative depiction of what happens to people who struggle with echoism. Because, like Echo. People who struggle with echoism tend to fall into relationships with extremely narcissistic friends and partners. And like Echo, they struggle to have a voice of their own. And we talk about the research that I did that brought me to that perspective and that understanding, and also where it fits in even with our discussions of narcissism. But in order to heal, people who, and this is not a diagnosis, I should say that up front. Echoism is an adaptation or traits that develop often because somebody had to survive in a narcissistic relationship or family with parents. But the end result is they struggle to hold on to their own needs and have a voice in relationships. And it's not hard to see how that can create the kind of dance that we were talking about earlier, where people who need to take up all the room in one way or another, and the more extremely narcissistic someone is, the more room they need to take up. If they need to take up room, they're more comfortable with somebody who can shrink to fit to size, to their size and the size of the relationship that person needs them to be in. And when that's an adaptation, when that's sort of a natural way of doing things, remember, Echo had no voice of her own. Echoists, I learned from the research, tend to echo the needs and feelings of others. Not always, but that is one form that it takes. And when you're cut off from that sense of self, you really can't protect yourself. You don't have access to healthy anger, the kind of things that help you navigate and protect yourself in a relationship that's harmful to you, or that the feeling of anger and self-protection, you need to leave a relationship.
What do you think the baseline fear of that echoist is, that if they step in, what is the essential fear of what's going to happen to them?
The core fear of anyone who struggles with echoism is that their needs are too much, or they will become a burden, or they will appear to be selfish. So what I learned in the research is, in the same way you can think of narcissism, extreme narcissism especially, as the drive to feel as special, exceptional, or unique, people who struggle with echoism fear the experience of being attended to in some special way, often because it caused problems in their past. They had to make way for their father or their mother in order to survive and find some way to stay connected in a relationship. So they learned this core sense of, I'm too much, I need to rein myself in, I need to be really careful about how much room I take up, and my needs will be a problem. Because any parent who is so preoccupied with their own needs, for whatever reason, but especially if it's something like extreme narcissism, any parent who struggles in that way, they really can't make way for other people. And their children will learn to accommodate that by trying to be as undemanding, as unselfish, bring as few expectations as possible to the relationship. And when this becomes patterned, when it becomes just a way of moving through relationships and being in the world, it continues over time into adulthood.
Yeah. So this is generational. This is an epigenetic component that develops through the family of origin stuff. And I'm curious, because for a child that was in this environment with a narcissistic parent, if you will, whether that's mom or dad, there's likely the other side of that. There's likely an echoist in that patterning as well. And how does that kind of get enmeshed into their psychology, or, the choice that they make to move in one direction or the other? Because typically there's going to be a movement in one direction or the other, right? Because
That's correct.
One child can see that, okay, if I am big, if I do demand, if I am grandiose, then I get this need met. And on the other side of it, it's like, if I do that, I am squelched. So my survival comes in one direction or another. And it's interesting to me how that choice, that unconscious choice occurs.
Yeah, I like that you're putting in those terms. These really are survival strategies. Use the word survival.
Mm-hmm.
Family is the first environment. It's our first group, and we have to be able to survive in that group. Kids can't just leave, right? So for children, it really is a matter of survival. And when parents turn away or distance or are shaming or critical, we know from the research that that really does feel life-threatening to children. It's not a metaphor, it's not figurative, because they can't survive without their family and their parents. So in that environment, when a child is faced with a parent that always needs to, be the one special person in the relationship or the family, they do have one of two options. And this is where genetics and temperament come in,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if somebody, let's go back to the research. When I looked it was really from 2013 to 2017, because I continued the research after I wrote the book, and we continued to collect data. And what we found is that people who fit this pattern of echoism, this fear of seeming narcissistic in any way, that live by the rule, the less room I take up, the better. They did show tendencies. They showed that they had an overlap with what's called highly sensitive person,
Mm-hmm.
HSP, felt things intensely, experienced emotional intensity, often more so than other people. Sometimes were more quiet and empathic. And if you think of that kind of temperament, the biology, the equipment that a kid like that brings to the family situation, they're going to lean towards echoism as a solution, because they don't have the inborn aggression and bigness and extroversion. So what we found again and again is people who adapt in this way, whether they have a parent who's egoistic and they're trying to be like them, or whether they have a narcissistic parent that they're trying to manage and deal with just to survive growing up, they tend to have a more sensitive temperament in that way, and they will choose the path of egoism. Whereas somebody who is born with a little more aggression, who's more naturally outgoing, who's more extroverted by nature, who's more disagreeable, these are measurable tendencies, agreeableness versus disagreeableness. That child might feel safer identifying with the aggressor, as we call it, right? I'm gonna, as you said, I'm gonna be the big one. I'm gonna get out of this situation. I'm gonna get through this situation by trying to be the more powerful person in the interaction, because there's always going to be one, and I'm going to be that one. So that very experience often sets people up to be narcissistic. But as I alluded to, I mean, you can have a mom who came to the family already with some of these patterns, who fears that her needs will be too much for everyone, pairs up with a father who's a little bit more narcissistic. And now the child also, as you were pointing out, has a model for, I want to be like mom, right? Of the two of them, I prefer mom. So now we've got nature and nurture setting up the situation where people can be anywhere along that spectrum. We should probably talk about the spectrum too, where echoism fits in when we get a chance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious, in your research, did you find any place that placement and family had a component to it?
Where the family had a component.
Where the order of the child, first, second, third, whatever, had a component in it?
Sometimes. I mean, this is anecdotal. We didn't have birth order as a data point.
Oh, I just wondered.
Yeah, but anecdotally, I can say in my clinical practice, not surprisingly, firstborn children in a family like that, if they tip more towards that sensitive temperament, it's sort of more natural. empathy, they were they are more likely to fall into a caretaker role, which is one expression
Mhm.
of echoism. If somebody's going to get their needs met here, it's not going to be me. I'll take care of you. I'm going to focus on you and make sure you have what you need. Little brother, little sister, or maybe even parent.
Okay, give to get.
Yes. Yeah, there's a unconscious solution in there that if I want my needs met, I've got to make sure someone else is taken care of first.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What about only kids, only child?
Again, nothing that we directly studied, but anecdotally, in my experience, unless this is a kid with a lot of, will,
Mhm.
um, maybe they inherited a lot of the same kind of temperament as a narcissistic parent. And even then, it's going to be hard for them if they're an only child. Um, the parent is going to win in that battle
Yes.
of wills. And they're probably going to slip more. And I'm drawing on also working with people in this situation. They're probably going to be more, if they're narcissistic, more vulnerably narcissistic, but it's going to push them towards egoism. Because if there can be only one, it's not going to be the kid.
Right.
Yeah.
So in this dance, and I want to play with consciousness with our listeners and put some reflective pieces in this conversation for them, because I think, again, as we start to explore this arena of conflict, of high conflict families, of where separation is, and there's a separate family, and there's this conversation in this world that's always talking about how do you survive a narcissist? Um, how do you deal with that component? And always, almost always, the conversation that I'm hearing is one of disdain and judgment and all bad, all good kind of conversations in this arena. And rarely do I hear a conversation of the dance that this echo is playing in that conversation, or that component of not having that voice, or not taking that action, or not engaging in self-will in that. And even as I say that, I feel my own bias coming into that conversation, as that's a problem. And there's an inherent piece of survival and how to navigate that relationship within that as well. How do we in this conversation, Craig, bring that up into, this isn't just you're a component of the dance, but really an exploration of that component, so somebody can get their head around and their being around that shift. Because what we're really talking about, I think, to a large extent, is agency.
Oh, yeah.
And the echo is lacking agency.
Oh, yeah.
And how does that begin to manifest, and how can we have a conversation about how somebody clinically can start to engage in shifting that?
Yeah. Well, the first step I always work with people on to reclaim their agency is to tap into healthy anger.
Mm.
Right? But we should back up. I want to say a little bit about the general pattern of traits for echoes, and we did kind of an overview.
Okay.
But specifically, you want to also think of echoism as a lack of healthy narcissism. It's a very controversial term, even though lately there's more and more rigorous research, including a instrument called the Narcissistic Admiration and Rivalry questionnaire that points to these healthy aspects of what we also call self-enhancement, right? So self-enhancement is not self-esteem. I believe we talked about this in our last conversation. It's not self-confidence. It's a slightly overly positive view of self, world, and future, like rose-colored glasses. And this is what we think of as healthy narcissism. This research goes all the way back to the late 70s. What we found in our research was that somebody who struggles with egoism, not only do they struggle to have a voice, they lack that healthy self-enhancement, right? It turns out that happy, healthy people around the world don't have a realistic view of self, and they don't think of themselves as average, even if they are. They have a slightly overestimated view of self, and this actually comes out of healthy relationship experiences. It makes sense if you think about it, right? All of us, if we're doing our jobs as our parents, our kids feel like the gleam in our eye, and they should. And that's the first experience of feeling special to someone. We're not the most important people in the universe, but we are in this instance, right? And that's kind of what gives people this. People who struggle with egoism don't have that. And the first data point that I ran across when I was developing all this research was just even looking at something like the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. Turns out that people who score very, very low on that, or 0, are not healthy, right? They're anxious, they're depressed, they often are self-critical. And it makes sense, because if every time you try to take up room with your own agency, your own feelings, your own needs, you're either shut down in direct ways like criticism or shame, or you're shut down because you feel distance between you and your parent, right? If that has been your experience, you're going to shrink yourself. You're going to lop off those parts of yourself that include agency and anger and all of those healthy expressions of personhood. And one of the ways people do that is they blame themselves. So why is this interaction between my father going so poorly? I guess I was selfish. I guess I was asking for too much, or I'm not being careful enough. He's had a hard day. He's always on edge at the end of a long work day. So that's self-blame. None of that is the kid's responsibility. So when I work with people, I help them set aside self-blame and get in touch with their healthy anger about how they're being treated when their core needs aren't being met or they're being mistreated. And that's separate from whether or not you ever express this to the person with whom you're having this kind of interaction. I often encourage people to find ways to do that just to test out if it's safe, what will happen. But what matters is internally, can they be with themselves in the feeling of, this is not right. I deserve better than this. And that's the movement from egoism to a greater sense of agency. But it starts with really being able to feel anger. Very often people who struggle with egoism that I see, they can't even identify angry feelings.
Okay. So, and I think oftentimes those statements that you made of you're too much, or I can't give you that, or all of those things are not always implicit. They're oftentimes explicit. They're oftentimes statements of, you're too much. I can't deal with you.
Stop being so demanding. Stop being such a brat.
Yeah.
You're spoiled. Messages like that we should never say to kids. We tell, if their behavior is going awry, we help them correct course, and we help them understand the feelings that are driving it. What we don't do is shame them into silence.
And how often do parents do that unconsciously? Because they may be in a state of depletion and they may not be able to handle that conversation coming in. or that energy coming at them, because children can be demanding, they can be big, they can be full, and that's their job, right? That's how they find themselves
Correct.
and their agency in it.
That is their job. Their job is to be too much. But there's the flip side to that. There's this famous quote. I can't remember who said it in our field, but there isn't enough love in the world for one child.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so being able to organize ourselves around the experience of this little kid, again, this is what sort of fosters a sense of I matter. Actually, sometimes I'm really important, that they can then carry with them. But to your point, yes, people all the time, myself included, we're tired, we're distracted, we can't focus on our child. The difference between somebody who handles that in a way that helps their child remain secure in the feeling of being loved and in themselves, and a person who doesn't, say somebody who's so narcissistic they don't tune into it at all, is that a person, for a parent who has had a long day, can't really attend to the handful of a kid in the moment, they repair. Parents who are able to create a healthy relationship with the kids, the man said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetie. I was so tired last night. Do you want to play? I know that was really hard for you. I know you felt lonely. Do you want to play something this afternoon? I have a ton of time this afternoon. And I'm really sorry about how I handled that."
Yeah.
Repair is what matters. And it also is what fosters that healthy sense of agency. It's not, there's nothing wrong with me or my needs. My parent just told me they were having a hard time,
Right.
and they couldn't do it, but now they can, and now they want to.
And they recognize the need.
Yeah, and they recognize the need, and my need matters.
Yeah. Repair is so important for a parent.
Absolutely. Yes.
And when a child doesn't get that, there is that building of I am not important, or I am too much, or I can't ask for what I need,
or I'm not enough.
Or I'm not enough.
Or I would get attention if I was more. Yeah. If I was more higher achieving, if I was more impressive, if I attended to my parent more. Yeah.
So I'm just kind of formulating a question in here around the egoism component, and I'm looking for a little clarification. I'm wondering within that if there is an inherent, I know there's an inherent suppression of self in that, but I'm wondering if there's an inherent depletion that comes along with that. So that withdrawal from self, or that withdrawal from engagement in, creates, because of the over containment, the ongoing over containment of that energy, and that takes energy to contain it, right? Does that lead to depletion in that person and their inability to access that agency that we're talking about?
I think 100% in that it depletes, because this is one of the reasons that extreme egoistic traits are correlated with depression. Right? There's a shutdown. There's a shutdown of a person, this shrinking to fit to size, clamping down on the self. And then on top of that, anybody who has that experience, it makes us frustrated. It makes us angry. And then what do you do if that's not safe to express or experience? And for people who struggle with egoism, so in an abusive environment, there's no way that express anger or frustration. So all of that gets turned inward. And this is one of the reasons what's so depleting is the core sense of self that develops, that I'm the problem. I need to fix myself. And now we're back to the dance. Because if your default assumption is you're what's wrong and you need to fix yourself, then you don't have access to the needs and feelings that you need to be able to at least fuel you in a relationship when you're with somebody who's extremely narcissistic. And in fact, it doesn't invite them at all, challenge them at all to be different. if somebody
Right.
is reflexively taking that position and doesn't even know it. Things start to change when the person gets in touch with those feelings in themselves. This is where, again, this does not apply in an abusive situation, right? Where they may not even, it may not be safe. It may not even be within the realm of possibility to ever express disappointment or anger towards an abusive partner. In fact, it usually isn't. But what is within the realm of possibility is to take care of these internal dynamics. I am not going to blame myself. I am not the problem. I am not at fault. And then that can fuel you to action. You don't have to say anything to the person that you're in the dance with. It's still going to help you move forward.
So this becomes really nuanced, especially when we're talking about high conflict relationships and the divorces and the custody battles that come along with that. But when the separation happens between this narcissist and this egoist, if you will, the dance doesn't stop necessarily.
No.
But the separation is there, and the notion that, okay, now I've got separation, and I bring this agency in, triggers this other piece over here to get even more aggressive and more abusive in their behavior.
Correct.
And the notion that I have in this process is one of disengagement and teaching this person how to really stay disengaged from this and let this do whatever its dance is going to do.
You got it. Yes.
But that's a hard place for this person that's never been able to find that.
Yes.
And to disengage from that, because the defensive response is, if I stay disengaged, they just get bigger, they just get nastier, and they just keep coming. And how do we teach that to stay in, this is just noise mostly?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the teaching part, right? Is that this is just noise, right? This is often when I'm working with somebody who struggles with egoism, and if their ex is extremely narcissistic, the big shift is towards, this has nothing to do with me. That's the big shift, the unhooking.
God, I really want you to say that again, and I want you to expand on that piece, because I think that is the core of what wants to happen here.
Yes. And that's where the anger comes in, right? I don't deserve to be treated this way no matter what. It doesn't matter what I said or didn't say. And the unhooking part, not making it about you in a way, right? Somebody who's extremely narcissistic always makes it about them. But egoists always make it about them as a problem.
Right.
And being able to get to that place of, oh, this is the epiphany moment for somebody I'm helping. Oh, it doesn't matter what I do or don't do. This is something internal to them, and they're just going to be this way.
Yep. And
then they can channel their sense of agency and protection into what I call borrowed agency, right? Where you're not going to, this is at that point, high conflict, and they're already divorced. This isn't going to be a conversation about how to handle things with the kids or what to do about this or what to do about that. This is going to be about consequences, what's built into divorce agreements, what you advocated for to be packaged in the divorce settlement. The less you have to interact with somebody who isn't changing and can't change in that way, the better. And so the agency you hand over with your anger and your clarity about, this is how I need to protect myself, you hand over to the lawyers, you hand over to the court. It's about structure, not conversation. And then for the person who's recovering from egoism, they take that healthy sense of self to other relationships.
Yep. I think part of what gets in the way of getting to that healthy piece is where the pendulum swings too far, where the healthy anger becomes aggression,
which is not anger.
right?
Yeah,
But
it's discharge.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Man, that is so poignant. I think that is an important piece because that discharges that cathartic piece of I'm going to fight back, and the fight back that I try to teach the people that I'm working with is it's about boundary, and it's about neutrality. It's about I'm just not going to do it, and I don't have to fight you over it. I'm just not going to do it.
Nodding vigorously. That's the shift.
Right.
It's kind of a being with the self instead of turning away from your needs and feelings. If you're getting into a back and forth, aggressive back and forth with an ex, you've already abandoned yourself. Because think about it this way.
And you're buying right into what they want you to do.
Exactly. And they get connection.
Right.
They've got you. They've still got connection. You would never say to a child with a friend who's being nasty, or even an adult child, right, that you care about, you need to go back at them. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. You need to go fight for your rights. You need to go tell them what's up. No, you would say, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You don't deserve to be treated this way. This is just not okay. How can I help you? What do you need? Right? And we need to bring that to ourselves. There's a kind of being with yourself in those interactions that leads to, I am not going to respond to this text message.
Right.
There's nothing good that's going to come of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like the way that you talked about that engagement piece is the hook for the narcissistic personality. That's how they bring you in, and that is a form of connection. I know that you've heard the term, I use this term all of the time, as being negative intimacy.
Yeah.
And you're still in relationship with
connection
them.
Is connection.
Right.
Doesn't have to be positive. They still got you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're taking up room in your head, and they're taking up room in your life. And sometimes, particularly again, if we're talking about the extreme, somebody who's abusive,
mm-hmm.
unconsciously for them, they like you being preoccupied with them, because then they exist.
Right.
They matter.
Right.
Right. And they always matter because they're always in your head.
Mm-hmm.
It's not planned, but that is the feeling, right? Yeah. For parents who are extremely narcissistic to the point of abuse, on some level, they take delight in being a terrible thought in their child's head, because they're always there.
Uh-huh. Right. So again, as we're talking here, Craig, I'm getting a sense that, and please help me clarify this, or tell me if I'm just totally off base, because I'm good either way.
So far, you've been right on track, so I doubt it.
These seem to be opposite sides of the same coin, that the goal of each one of these personalities is the same goal. The approach is just different.
No, that's exactly right. Right. So the goal is to survive and stay connected.
Mm-hmm.
What people who are extremely narcissistic learn is the only way I can survive and stay connected is if I'm special in some way. Otherwise, I disappear. I'm nothing. Right. And what echoists learn is the only way to survive and stay connected at all is to not seem or feel too special. Right. But the goal is still the same, to be able to have some semblance of safety and involvement in some place in relationships.
So help me with this next one, if you will. And I want to clarify this before I step into this puddle. I am not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that, abusive behavior is okay in any format.
Never is. Yeah.
That being said, if we are in this dance, if we're coming at this from the perspective of echo with a narcissist, if you will, as the abuse is taking place, how does that person, in understanding the development of the narcissistic behaviors, utilize that information in their own healing? To your point, this isn't about me. That's their stuff. That's their development. That's their family of origin. That's their experience. That's their adaptation. And in understanding that, being able to disengage from it, to step back from it, and step into their own history of how they got into that, in order to do their healing, one, but also to be able to practically stay disconnected from that process. Did that make sense?
I think I followed up until a certain point. So how can their understanding of their partner or ex help them in their healing?
Mm-hmm. And their understanding of their own family of history help them in that complex.
Yeah, I think one simple way to organize it is that because of their experiences, people who struggle with echoism, their needs feel dangerous to them. And once they start to understand that and know that, they can track it. Anytime a need comes up, they get anxious. They have to get rid of it, or they have to go around it in some way, or they might act on it immediately. It's something called need panic. This gets very confusing for people who struggle with echoism because, right, their whole feeling is they're afraid of becoming burdened. And then there's these times where, for some of them, they go through a period of loss or some difficulty, or something starts to overwhelm them, and then they're on the phones constantly to friends, or they're trying to talk to their partner, or they're immediately asking for some help, and there's no gap between what the time something took place, and they can't wait to get the help. This is need panic, because the easiest way to get rid of a need is to have it met immediately. All right. So need plus anxiety creates neediness. All right. So that can happen too. But for somebody who becomes comfortable with their needs, who understands, oh, I get it. In my development, in my family, for me to need was dangerous. Right. It caused threat to me. So when I'm with a partner who acts like my needs are a problem, I agree. Right. And so this person over here, my ex, anytime I have some expectation, or I'm disappointed in some way, even in small, or something doesn't feel right to me, they're going to get angry. Because what they learned is if anybody else has needs, they miss out. What they learned is the only one person can have needs. Only one person can be attended to. So for me, when I come needing anything at all, my partner will experience me as a threat. That's why they react the way they do. But my needs aren't the problem. I have to stay with them and know that they're okay. They're not dangerous. They shouldn't have been made to feel dangerous in childhood, and they're not dangerous now. He acts like they're dangerous. Yeah.
So we're moving from unhealthy into healthy relationship is what we're trying to do, and we're trying to accomplish. We're getting out of the high conflict piece. We're trying to find new connection. And I think what I'm hearing is this notion of testing through a different lens with whatever new partner I have, because I can recreate the piece in and of itself on my own. Yeah. But if I'm in testing with a new partner, and the question is, and the reflection is different, and I'm in a conversation about it, then things can really start to heal in both directions, because I think we have a tendency to find these partners anyway. We have a tendency to have these tendencies in it. But if we're doing it in a healthy manner, we can test the conversation. I have this need. What do you think about this need? And to find attunement in it where, oh, that is a little too much for me, but this isn't. Or to work the relationship to make the new relationship something different and not a repetition of what
That's
we've
right.
done.
No, that's absolutely right. And this is where, just I want to make it explicit again, we're not talking about healing from an abusive relationship within the abusive relationship. The first step in an abusive relationship is the abuse has to stop. Otherwise, it's not safe to examine these dynamics at all.
Right.
So for anybody out there who has experienced abuse from their partner or anyone else, that's not that. Yes, you want to get in touch with a healthy anger. Yes, you want to get in touch with how your past has shaped you, and the abuse needs to stop. Right. But short of that, there's plenty of people, even with narcissistic personality disorder. Remember, there's diversity in the diagnosis. This is what you were putting out earlier. We cannot equate narcissistic personality disorder with abusive personality, because not all people who have extreme narcissism are abusive, and not all abusers are narcissistic. People abuse from many sources, right? So there's plenty of people with narcissistic personality disorder who are just aloof. They lack empathy at times, but they would never hurt anyone. All right, maybe they were put down as kids, so they would never put anybody down, but they're really difficult to deal with. They don't seem to have much capacity to take perspective. Take somebody like that, and if you struggle with egoism, and you start to get in touch with your own needs and feelings, and just test out in small ways, voicing them. I've had a really long day today. I need to sleep in tomorrow. What would help make that possible? I know you like to get up and at 'em early. It's not something I'm going to be able to do physically. So I'm just putting on notice right now. I'm not planning to get up at the usual time, right? And like being really clear. And if the partner gets immediately incensed or angry, bad sign. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong.
Okay.
But even if they aren't able to receive it, even if they don't like what they're hearing, you've just done something for yourself. It's that internal change. And with any luck, this is challenging your partner to see, well, can I accommodate somebody else? She's doing it in like a very loving, caring way. I guess I realized I didn't couch it in loving terms, and I could have done that. Like, sweetheart, it's really important to me. I'm exhausted. I would love to get some rest. I would really appreciate if anything that would help you with me sleeping in, right? Something like that.
And languaging is so important in this, and we lose that because we just have the assumption that somebody's going to hear what we want to say. And when I'm working with my couples, it's like languaging is everything, and put it in terms of endearment and connection and relationship.
And this is especially important
with
somebody who struggles with narcissism. Right? Because what you want to do is light up those underused or blocked areas of the brain. Communal activation, we call it in the research, devoted to caring and connection and relationships, mutual care and concern. Narcissists have learned that the only way to survive and try to remain in relationship is to focus on being special, which has nothing to do with mutual care and concern. But some of them have the capacity. And if somebody is so egoistic that they won't even in themselves, forget about saying it to your partner. If they can't even in themselves, like, no, you know what? I really need to sleep in tomorrow. If they can't sort of hold on to what is important to them and what will help them, they can't ever really test out if their partner has capacity. It remains at that dance where I'm with you because I'm afraid to take up too much room, and you do me the service that sometimes pisses me off of taking up most of the room, so I don't have to face that, right? And the narcissistic person is like, I'd rather not consider anyone too much. Are you okay with that? Right? That's what needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, for people that are in these, typically that are getting divorced out of these high conflict pieces are in some level of abusive relationships. Sometimes that is perceived and not real, and sometimes it's really real. But in either case, it's I think it requires distance. It requires the ability to have somebody like yourself that can reflect back to them these principles of self-care and self-need and needs met and whatnot, and to stay disengaged from that abusive piece and to take care of yourself, because that's the place where you've struggled most of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important for these people as well, because they've got children, and the children have to be able to have a mirror or reflection that self-care and getting needs met is okay.
Mm-hmm. And if with children, for you, if you identify with any of these patterns of egoism, for you to do the work to heal, even if you've left your ex, for you to do the work to heal will help your children, because then you are able to protect them better. Somebody who struggles with egoism is going to have a hard time stepping up to help their child with the ways that they're feeling squashed internally, or they're blaming themselves because they're not quite sure how to do it themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Craig, I know we're up against a pretty hard stop here today.
Yeah.
I want to start to pull the plug and back up here for a moment. I want to thank you again for coming and doing this. This focus on narcissist counterpart echo, I think, is a really good discussion that we didn't get very deep into last time, and I'm really appreciating that. You've got your book, Rethinking Narcissism.
Yes.
How else are you getting some of your brilliance and your research out?
Well, I've kind of stopped working so hard on getting my research out directly. We might have missed our opportunity to really make a splash with the research, because again, along came the Narcissistic Admiration and Rivalry Questionnaire, and it does a really good job of explaining pretty much all the patterns. It doesn't touch on egoism, and that's the one hole that I think I would like to fill. But the way I get the word out now is I do a lot of consulting, both individually. People come to me who want help with relationships like this. Sometimes I do corporate consulting, but I also just give, I also come into the school where I teach. I don't want to drop the H-bomb, but like where I also come in to teach other people how to do this kind of work.
Yeah. What's the H-bomb?
That's what it's like the Harvard Medical School. That's like, that's probably me recovering from my egoism. But anyway, yeah, I teach at Harvard Medical School.
Nice. Well, I'm glad that you use the H word here, because it's there's the H-bomb.
Yeah.
So for the listeners, anybody that hasn't read the book Rethinking Narcissism, read it. I mean, it's really good stuff, and it really helps change some of the perspective. You coming in, having these conversations with my listeners, I really value that, and I think that they do as well. And if we've got a moment, well, we're kind of out of time today. We've been live on YouTube. I hope the people that are in listening to this are getting some really good information, because you're there because you're a member of our membership group, and you have the privilege to have that first look, and there's a reason for being in that membership. So keep that up, keep coming back. And again, Craig, thank you.
My pleasure.
I hope we get another opportunity at some point. I know your time is valuable, and I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. It's good to see you again.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Take care.